The battlefield was quiet now. Too quiet. The echo of gunfire had faded, replaced by the soft hiss of smoke and the faint cry of the wind moving through broken metal and burnt trees. It was the kind of silence that didn't bring peace, only the reminder that peace had been taken away. Among the fallen soldiers, one figure lay still. His name was Private Daniel Brooks, 22 years old, from a small town that smelled of pine trees and home-cooked dinners. He had a crooked smile, a soft laugh, and dreams that were far too big for a world torn apart by war. The medic moved carefully through the field, boots pressing into the mud, eyes searching for life where there seemed to be none. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the heavy weight of what he already knew. He stopped beside Daniel. "Another one," he whispered. His voice was rough, tired. He knelt, checked for a pulse, but found only stillness. The young man's uniform was covered in dirt and ash, a patch torn open where the bullet had gone through. The medic sighed. "I'm sorry, kid." He reached to close Daniel's eyes, but as his hand brushed the soldier's chest, he felt something stiff beneath the fabric. A pocket. He hesitated, then slowly reached inside. A piece of folded paper, stained with blood and rain. He unfolded it carefully, a letter, written in shaky handwriting. The ink had run, but a few words were still clear. "Dear Mom." The medic froze. He swallowed hard and looked around the battlefield, endless rows of silence, bodies lying where they fell. So many stories, all ending in the same quiet way. But this one had words left behind. He folded the paper back, gently, almost as if afraid to disturb it. "He never lived to send it," he whispered. And for a moment, that thought hit him harder than the sound of any gun. Because that letter wasn't just ink on paper. It was a piece of a man, his last voice, trapped forever in a folded page. The medic slipped it into his pocket. "I'll make sure it gets home." But deep down, he wasn't sure if it ever would. The camera drifts upward, over the field. Smoke curls toward the sky like tired ghosts. The war had moved on to another front, but here time stood still. The narrator's voice softens. Sometimes, the loudest stories come from the quietest places. Sometimes, what's left behind says more than the ones who survived. And somewhere inside that letter was something no one expected. Something written not just to a mother, but to someone else entirely. Someone who still didn't know he was gone. Who was Daniel writing to that night? And what secret hid between the lines of his final words? The story of that letter doesn't end on the battlefield. It begins one night before the fighting ever started. The camp was quiet then, quiet in the way a man holds his breath before a storm. The air was cold, filled with the smell of wet earth and gun oil. Somewhere in the distance, someone was softly playing a harmonica, trying to chase away fear with music. Private Daniel Brooks sat alone near the faint glow of a lantern. His rifle rested beside him, but his eyes were fixed on a small piece of paper. The pen shook slightly in his hand. He took a deep breath, then began to write. "Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to write it anyway." He paused, staring at those words. His hands were strong from carrying a weapon, but tonight they trembled like a boy's. "I'm fine, or at least I tell myself I am. The food is bad, the nights are long, but the boys here keep me laughing. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine your kitchen. I can almost smell the bread you used to bake." He smiled for a second. Then his expression softened. "You'd tell me to be brave, I know you would. You always said courage isn't about not being scared, it's about doing what you must even when you are. I try to remember that." He stopped writing, staring into the dark. The sounds of the camp surrounded him, quiet whispers, boots scraping, someone coughing in a tent. A question drifted through his mind, the same one he never dared to say out loud: will I ever get to see home again? And now let me ask you, if you were in his place, knowing tomorrow could be your last sunrise, what would you write? Who would you think of first? Would your words come easy, or would your hands shake too? Daniel looked down at the letter again. "Sometimes, Mom, I think about what happens if I don't make it back. I don't want you to cry." I want you to remember me as the boy who used to chase fireflies, not the soldier who didn't come home." He sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. Then his pen hesitated again. This time, he wrote something different. Something softer. "There's another reason I'm writing tonight. There's someone I need to talk about. Her name is Lily." The name lingered in the air like a secret spoken into the wind. "She writes to me every week, even when I forget to write back. She says she's proud of me, but I don't think she understands how much I miss her. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see her face instead of the war." He folded the letter slightly, thinking. Then unfolded it again. He wasn't ready to finish it. Not yet. He looked up at the stars, a sky so calm it almost made him forget where he was. Maybe he thought he'd have more time. Maybe he believed he'd finish the letter tomorrow. But as he leaned back against the sandbag wall, a low rumble rolled through the distance. A sound every soldier knows too well. Artillery. Daniel froze, eyes widening. The ground began to tremble. Orders shouted. Boots thudding. The storm had arrived. He quickly folded the half-written letter, slipped it into his pocket, and grabbed his rifle. For a moment, he turned back toward the small lantern light, and whispered, "I'll finish it later." But the night had already decided otherwise. That unfinished letter stayed close to his heart as he went into battle. And as the world around him turned to fire and smoke, Daniel wasn't fighting alone. He had brothers beside him. Brothers who would soon face their own fate. The battlefield hadn't begun yet. The air was heavy, waiting, the kind of silence before a storm when every heartbeat feels louder than thunder. Daniel walked through the camp, the half-written letter folded safely in his pocket. Around him, men were talking, laughing, and pretending they weren't scared. Some cleaned their rifles. Others stared at the stars, thinking of home. Every face carried a story. Every story had the same question: will I still be here tomorrow? Daniel's squad had become more than just soldiers. They were family now, brothers in arms, held together by the same fear, the same mud, and the same promise to watch each other's backs. There was Tommy, the youngest of them all, barely 19. He carried a photo of his sister in his helmet, said it kept him safe. There was Harris, who always cracked jokes when everyone else was quiet, even when no one laughed. And there was Sergeant Miller, older, calm, with eyes that had seen too many good men fall. "Morning, Brooks," Miller said, sipping coffee that looked more like mud. "You get any sleep?" Daniel shook his head and smiled faintly. "Didn't want to waste my last dream before the big day." Miller raised an eyebrow. "Don't talk like that, son. You'll jinx us." But both of them knew the truth. In war, superstition was just another name for hope. As the sun rose, the golden light hit their camp, turning the dust into gold for a few short moments. It almost looked beautiful. Almost. Daniel sat beside Tommy, who was scribbling something on a scrap of paper. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "My will," Tommy said, grinning though his hands shook. "Figured I'd better write it before I forget how to spell my name." Daniel chuckled softly. "You'll need more paper if you plan on leaving me your sense of humor." For a moment, laughter cut through the fear. But laughter on the front lines is a fragile thing. It never stays long. Later that day, the squad gathered around a small campfire. Miller spoke softly, his tone half prayer, half command. "Tomorrow we hold that bridge," he said. "No matter what happens, we stay together. No hero moves alone. Got it?" Every man nodded. Daniel looked around the circle, the glow of firelight on tired faces, eyes that carried both courage and dread. He realized then that brotherhood wasn't built in easy times. It was built here, in fear, in hunger, in the quiet understanding that your life was in another man's hands. He thought about his letter again. About how his mother would have liked these men. She would have fed them, prayed for them, called them her boys too. Have you ever met someone who wasn't family by blood, but felt like family anyway? Someone who stood by you when things got hard? That's what these men were to each other. War may take away names, but it can never erase the bonds formed in its fire. Night came fast, wrapping the camp in cold. The fire burned low. Men whispered stories about home, fishing trips, old cars, girls they missed. Daniel stared at the glowing embers and said quietly, "When we get back, I'm finishing my letter." Miller looked over. "Make sure you do, son. Don't leave words unsent." Those words hit Daniel harder than the chill in the air. Because somewhere deep inside, a part of him wondered if he ever would get that chance. And when the morning came, they would march toward that bridge, a mission no one would forget. They went not as soldiers chasing glory, but as brothers walking into the unknown. None of them knew that within 24 hours, only one would return alive. Morning came wrapped in fog. The kind that hides everything, even fear. The camp was already awake before the sun was. Soldiers moved in silence, checking weapons, tying laces, whispering quiet prayers that no one else could hear. Private Daniel Brooks stood with his squad, the same brothers who laughed around the fire just hours ago. Only now, there were no jokes. Only steady breaths and heavy eyes. Sergeant Miller walked past them, his voice low but clear. "Today we hold that bridge. If we lose it, the enemy cuts our supply line. That can happen." He paused, looking at each of them. "You all know what to do. Watch each other's backs. No one gets left behind." Daniel nodded, hand tightening on his rifle. Inside his pocket, the folded letter pressed against his chest. He thought of his mother. He thought of Lily. And for a moment, he wished he could have finished writing those last lines. They moved out before dawn. The world around them looked almost peaceful, until the first shell hit. The blast tore through the stillness, throwing dirt, smoke, and fire into the air. The men hit the ground. Shouts. Orders. Chaos. Daniel's heart raced. He crawled forward, hearing Miller yelling over the noise. "Stay low! Keep moving!" The bridge stood ahead, an iron giant over a narrow river, half shattered already by previous bombings. They had to hold it. That was the mission. Bullets cut through the air like angry bees. The sound was deafening, yet somehow Daniel could still hear his own heartbeat, fast and desperate. He looked to his left. Tommy was firing back, his face pale but determined. To his right, Harris was shouting for ammo. And then, just like that, a shell landed too close. Everything went white. When Daniel opened his eyes, the world was smoke and ringing. His ears buzzed like broken wires. He saw movement, Miller dragging Harris, blood staining the ground. "Brooks! On your feet!" Miller shouted. Daniel stumbled up, clutching his rifle. He fired toward the advancing figures through the haze. His shoulder burned. He didn't even notice he'd been hit. For hours they fought, wave after wave, holding that bridge like it was the edge of the world. Every minute felt like forever. By noon, half the squad was gone. The others wounded, running out of ammo. Daniel crouched beside Tommy, who was bleeding from the leg. "I'm not leaving you," Daniel said. Tommy tried to smile. "You better. I can't run." "Go." Daniel shook his head. "Brothers don't leave brothers." He lifted Tommy's arm over his shoulder, pulling him toward cover as bullets ripped the ground around them. A shell exploded nearby. Daniel fell, pain slicing through his side. He hit the ground, ears ringing again. Tommy was gone. Smoke. Screams. Silence. Daniel tried to move, but his body refused. His vision blurred, the world fading in and out. He reached for his pocket, the letter. The paper was still there, warm against his chest. He took it out, holding it close, whispering, "The letter, make sure she gets it." His voice broke. His hand fell limp. Sergeant Miller crawled toward him through the smoke, shouting, "Brooks! Stay with me!" But Daniel's eyes had already grown still. The letter slipped from his fingers, landing in the dirt, a small, fragile thing in the middle of war's madness. The battle raged on. When the gunfire finally stopped, the bridge still stood. But the cost was unbearable. Miller was the only one left breathing. He crawled to Daniel's body and picked up the letter. He read the first words. Dear Mom. He swallowed hard, eyes stinging. I'll get this home, son. I promise. He folded it gently and tucked it into his own pocket. But as he limped away, clutching the letter that carried Daniel's last voice, the war moved forward like a tide that swallowed everything. Promises in war were easy to make, and so hard to keep. The letter survived the battle. It would travel through time, through silence, through forgotten hands, carrying a story no one knew they needed to hear. Because fate had other plans. War has a strange way of swallowing memories. Men disappear, names fade, and even the most powerful promises are buried under years of silence. But sometimes something small, a photograph, a medal, or a letter, survives the storm. And that's what happened to Daniel's letter. After the battle ended, Sergeant Miller carried it tucked inside his coat, stained with mud and grief. He told himself that when the war was over, he'd deliver it. He'd find Daniel's family and hand it to them, just like he promised. But war doesn't end cleanly. It moves, shifts, devours. Miller was injured in another fight weeks later. The letter, along with his personal things, was sent to an army collection center, a warehouse full of boxes that no one ever looked through again. Years passed. The war ended, peace returned, and life went on. But the letter never made it home. It slept quietly inside a wooden crate marked "Personal Effects, Unclaimed." Waiting. Decades later, inside a dusty military archive, a young historian named Evan Carter opened that same crate. He was cataloging old war relics for a museum, medals, helmets, faded photographs. Then, at the bottom of the box, he saw something folded and fragile. He lifted it carefully. The paper was yellowed with age, corners torn, but the words were still there. Dear Mom. Evan froze. It was a soldier's last letter, and signed, unfinished. He sat in silence, reading each smudged line. And as he did, something stirred in him, a feeling he couldn't shake. Who was this young man? Did anyone ever read his words? Or had he been forgotten like so many others? He searched the crate again and found a small metal tag, Brooks, Daniel. Private First Class. Service number 42117. Evan whispered the name under his breath, almost like a prayer. Daniel Brooks. And in that quiet moment, he made a decision. He would find the soldier's story. Because some letters don't deserve to be forgotten. That night, he couldn't sleep. The letter stayed beside his lamp, the words echoing in his mind. He imagined Daniel sitting under a dim lantern, writing with tired hands. He imagined the battlefield, the medic, the broken promise. It felt personal now, as if the letter had found him for a reason. And if you're listening to this right now, if Daniel's story already touches your heart, then don't just watch. Remember him. Remember every soldier whose words were lost to time. Because stories only live if we keep them alive. Take a moment. Think of the letters never sent, the goodbyes never spoken. That's what this story is really about. Over the next few weeks, Evan began searching through records. He traced the name Daniel Brooks through military archives, casualty lists, and hometown newspapers from the 1940s. It wasn't easy. Many records were missing. But eventually, he found a match: Private Daniel Brooks, killed in action, 1943. Hometown, Westfield, Ohio. Evan leaned back in his chair. Finally, a starting point. He printed the address from an old record, a small farmhouse outside town limits. When he arrived, the place was quiet. The roof sagged, the paint peeled, but a faint charm lingered, the kind of house that once held laughter and Sunday dinners. The mailbox still had the name Brooks faintly carved on it. Evan knocked, but no one answered. The house had long been abandoned. He walked around the property, thinking of the family who once lived there, a mother who prayed for her son to come home. He could almost hear her voice reading the letter that never arrived. Inside, the air smelled of dust and time. He found a few photos left behind, black and white images of a young man in uniform, smiling beside a woman. The handwriting on the back said, Daniel and Lily, summer 42. Evan whispered, Lily, the name from the letter. A new mystery. He realized then that the letter wasn't just written to a mother. It was written to love itself, to hope, to loss, to the people left behind. He folded the paper again and looked out the window toward the fading sunlight. Something in his heart told him this wasn't over. Because stories like this never really end, they just wait to be found. The letter had survived the war. The soldier had not. But sometimes, words last longer than the people who write them. And now, those words had found someone willing to listen. Evan Carter couldn't stop thinking about Daniel Brooks. The soldier felt real to him now, not a name in a file, not a photograph in black and white, but a young man who had laughed, loved, and written a letter he never got to finish. Each time Evan read those words, it felt like Daniel was whispering from the past. Dear Mom. There's someone I need to talk about. Her name is Lily. That single line, that single name, changed everything. Who was Lily? And why did Daniel never finish the letter? Evan started digging deeper. He searched through old newspapers, dusty town records, even local libraries that hadn't seen visitors in years. It took weeks. But eventually he found something, a small obituary dated 1944. Mrs. Margaret Brooks, mother of Private Daniel Brooks, passed away at her home in Westfield, Ohio. She was preceded in death by her only son, who was killed in action the previous year. Evan closed his eyes for a moment. The letter never reached her. She died never knowing what her son had written, never knowing his final words. The thought cut deep. How many mothers had gone through the same pain? How many goodbyes had been trapped inside lost envelopes? He drove to the town cemetery. The air was cool, the wind carrying the faint rustle of leaves. Rows of old headstones stood quietly, each one a story untold. He found her grave near the far end, Margaret Brooks, 1898 to 1944. He placed a hand on the cold stone. I have something that belongs to you, he said softly. Then he unfolded the letter and read the first few lines aloud, his voice trembling a little. For a moment, it felt like the world around him stopped listening to everything else, except the sound of those words finally being spoken. But the story wasn't finished yet. Evan returned to the photo he'd found in the house, Daniel and a young woman, smiling together before the war. On the back, Daniel and Lily, summer 42. He searched again, this time for Lily. Old records revealed she had once lived just 2 towns away. There was no death record. No marriage certificate. Could she still be alive? The thought seemed impossible, but something inside Evan told him to try. After days of searching, he found a nursing home record from a nearby town. Lillian Hayes, age 101. Evan's heart skipped. Could it really be her? He called, introduced himself, and asked to visit. The nurse on the phone paused, then said, She doesn't get many visitors, but yes, she'd love some company. That evening, Evan sat in his car outside the nursing home, the letter trembling in his hands. It was old, worn, fragile, just like the love story it carried. He thought of Daniel again, that young man who had written a few words that somehow survived everything. What would she feel when she saw it? Would she remember his face? His voice? And now I'll ask you, if someone you loved long ago suddenly reached out from the past, would you have the strength to open that message? Because some memories are heavier than silence. Evan walked down the hallway, the smell of flowers and old books filling the air. At the end of the corridor, he saw her, Lily, small and quiet, sitting near a window with sunlight spilling across her hands. Her hair was white, her eyes gentle but distant. Yet when she smiled, Evan could almost see the young woman from that photograph. He introduced himself, explained why he had come, and showed her the letter. She reached out slowly, fingers trembling as they touched the paper. For a moment she didn't speak, she just held it, staring at the name written in faded ink. Daniel, she whispered. Her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't spoken his name aloud in years. I thought the war took everything, she said quietly. But it looks like it forgot to take this. She smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed wet. Evan sat beside her. Would you like me to read it? She nodded. And as he began, the room seemed to fade, the years, the distance, all gone. It was as if Daniel himself had finally come home through his words. And when the last word left Evan's lips, Lily finally knew the message Daniel had carried in his heart until the very end. The letter had waited a lifetime to find her, and now, it was time for the final delivery. Perfect. Here's part 7. The final delivery. Written in your Soldier Tales style, cinematic, deeply emotional, and structured to keep the audience immersed through pacing, flow, and connection. The room was quiet. Only the ticking of an old clock and the soft breath of an old woman filled the space. Evan sat across from Lily, holding the letter as if it were something sacred. The paper was fragile, yellowed by time, the edges torn slightly by years of silence. Outside the window, the sun dipped low, painting the sky a soft gold. It felt almost as if the world itself was waiting to hear Daniel's words. Evan took a breath, and began to read. Dear Mom. By the time you read this, I might already be gone. I hope not. But if fate decides otherwise, I want you to know I wasn't afraid. I met some of the best men I'll ever know here. They call this war a duty, but to us, it's mostly about watching each other's backs. Tell Lily I think about her every night. Tell her I still carry the picture she gave me. It's worn out from being in my pocket, but I keep it close. It reminds me what home feels like. Evan paused. He looked at Lily. Her eyes were closed, tears rolling down her cheeks, but she whispered softly. He kept that photo, all this time. Evan continued. Mom, I don't want you to worry. If something happens, it's not because I was careless, it's because this world sometimes takes good people first. If I don't come back, tell Lily she was my reason to fight. Every time I ran through fire, I thought of her face. Every heartbeat was a promise that love is stronger than fear. Lily's trembling hands reached out, as though touching Daniel's words could bring him closer. She whispered, He always said he'd come back. I waited every day for a letter that never came. Her voice cracked, the weight of decades pressing through her fragile words. Evan could barely continue, but he did. And if this letter finds its way to Lily. My dearest, I'm sorry. I wanted to build a life with you. A small house near the river, a garden, maybe a dog. I wanted to grow old beside you and laugh about the things we once feared. But if I don't come home, know that my heart already did, because it stayed with you. Don't let the war steal your smile. Live for both of us. And when the sun rises, think of it as me, one more day watching over you. Evan's voice broke on the last line. The room fell silent again. Lily stared at the paper, her lips trembling. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then she whispered, He kept his promise. He came home, even if it took 80 years. She smiled through her tears. A small, beautiful smile that carried both heartbreak and peace. Evan placed the letter gently on the table beside her. The sunlight hit the page, making the faded ink glow, like the past itself had finally exhaled. A few days later, Evan returned to town. He stood with Lily in front of the Westfield War Memorial, where dozens of names were carved into the cold stone. Daniel Brooks, etched forever among heroes. Lily held the letter close to her heart, then slowly placed it against Daniel's name. The wind blew softly, carrying the paper's edge like a whisper. No music. No applause. Just silence, the kind that only comes when a soul finds peace. Evan watched as Lily closed her eyes and whispered, You can rest now, Danny. The world finally heard you. She took a step back. For the first time, she didn't look sad. She looked complete. Because sometimes, love doesn't end, it just waits. That night, Evan wrote his own notes for the archive. The letter found in a dead soldier's pocket was delivered at last. Its words didn't just belong to one man. They belonged to every soldier who never got to say goodbye. He looked out at the dark sky and said quietly, Maybe we don't write letters to be read. Maybe we write them to be remembered. And as the world turned, Daniel's story began to spread, across towns, schools, hearts, proving that even after death, a soldier's words can still march on. But what happened next, no one expected. Time passed quietly after that day at the memorial. The story of Private Daniel Brooks, the young soldier who never made it home, began to spread beyond the small town of Westfield. At first, it was just whispers. A local newspaper ran an article. Lost letter from World War II finally delivered after 80 years. Then a historian shared the story online. Within weeks, it reached thousands of people around the world. And soon, Daniel's words were everywhere. A schoolteacher in Ohio printed the letter and read it to her class during Veterans Week. A veteran in Texas wrote to Evan, saying, "I had a brother who never made it back." Hearing Daniel's words, it felt like he was speaking for all of us. Someone even framed a copy of the letter and placed it beside a memorial wall in Washington, D.C., with a single line beneath it. "If I don't come home, know that my heart already did." Back in Westfield, the memorial became more than stone and names. People started leaving small letters of their own, messages to fathers, sons, brothers, and friends they'd lost. Some said thank you. Some said I'm sorry. And some just said I miss you. Evan would often return there, walking among the letters fluttering softly in the wind. He realized that Daniel's story had done something no monument ever could. It had made people feel again. Because sometimes remembrance isn't built in marble. Sometimes it's written in ink and carried in the heart. Lily passed away peacefully a few months later. On her bedside table lay the letter, still folded neatly, and beside it, a photograph of Daniel in uniform. Her nurse said she had fallen asleep with a smile on her face. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond the world of war and sorrow, Daniel was waiting for her, just like he promised. Evan later wrote a book titled Letters They Never Sent. It was filled with stories of soldiers whose words were lost to history, until now. At the dedication page, he wrote, "For Daniel Brooks, whose final letter reminded the world that love never dies, and silence never wins." Years later, children visited the memorial with their parents. They touched Daniel's name and asked, "Who was he?" And every time, someone would tell the story. Because that's what stories like his are meant to do, live on. Not in textbooks, but in hearts. Maybe the world forgets faces. Maybe time erases names. But words, the ones written from the soul, they find their way back, no matter how long it takes. So tonight, as you sit here listening, think about this. If someone found your last words one day, what would they say about you? Would they speak of fear, or of love? Would they echo regret, or hope? Because every moment you're alive, you're still writing your own letter to the world. Daniel's story ends here, but not his voice. His words still travel, through every person who listens, remembers, and feels. War ends. But some letters never stop speaking.